Welcome back to Emotional Mojo. If you have ever needed proof that money cannot buy happiness, our next guest is living it. Sam Polk went from wealth addict to hero, tackling the hunger problem in America, and he joins us now. Sam, welcome to our show.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
You know what? We covered your story a couple weeks ago, and immediately we were all like, we got to get this guy. He's so inspirational. So why don't you kind of explain for everybody? You were a hedge fund trader, living it up in Manhattan by the age of 25. I mean, millions of dollars in bonuses alone. It doesn't sound too bad. It makes us think of a movie out right now, The Wolf on Wall Street. But why wasn't that enough for you? What happened?
Well, look, I was on Wall Street, and by the time I was 25, I was sort of living the sort of life of my dreams, which was, you know, I could go to any baseball game that I wanted to. I could go to the World Series. I could go to Nobu 5 times a week if I wanted. Every time I flew in on a plane from a business trip, I would have like a black car waiting for me, and it really was this tremendous feeling of power. But one of the things I noticed is that, you know, each year as my bonus got bigger and bigger and I had more and more money, I still had that same feeling that I'd always had. And that feeling was, you know, jealousy was a big part of it. So I'd sit there and I'd look at other traders who made more than me. And even though I would make $1 million a year, I'd see another trader that made 10 million, and I'd be sort of like racked with envy.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's the thing about Wall Street is like, you know, in some ways, I mean, in so many ways, I've been incredibly lucky. And, you know, one of those ways is that Wall Street brings so much money so quickly. So what I could see is that, you know, my dreams were sort of manifested and I was still miserable.
That is really very interesting. And this is Jada. From a psychology perspective, we call being addicted to more and more the hedonic adaptation. So you realized that you actually had an addiction to money and made a change. What was your wake-up call?
You know, it was this moment where I was in this meeting with my bosses, and, you know, these were all incredibly smart individuals, and we were talking about these new hedge fund regulations that were being proposed by Congress, and everybody in the room was sort of against them, and I said, well, isn't this better for the system as a whole? And they said, one of my bosses said, I don't have the brain capacity to think about the system as a whole. I can only think about what's good for us and our company. And to me, you know, I want to be really clear, like, I'm not sitting here with my finger pointed out at that guy. Because it wasn't that I like completely judged him, it was that I really saw myself in him, and I realized that, you know, I had sort of been given all these wonderful gifts of, like, you know, being a white man born in America and being born with intelligence, and I had used all of those sort of gifts solely sort of for my own benefit. And it just occurred to me for the first time that that wasn't right, that all these things were gifts, and with gifts come responsibility. But I also want to make the point that it wasn't just this one moment of epiphany. Like, the real truth of my story is that, you know, when I was 22, right when I started on Wall Street, I had these problems with drugs and alcohol, and so I sought help from a counselor. And this counselor, you know, if you can imagine, I was this sort of like white Ivy League sort of Wall Street type mentality. And she was this, you know, to my eyes, was this sort of like hippie-ish crazy woman.
Polar opposite.
And she was, so I would talk about success and ambition, and she started talking about, you know, integrity and taking accountability for my behavior and my role and purpose in the world. And to me, these were totally foreign concepts, but I was sort of so devastated by my drugs and alcohol and this breakup with this girl that I was sort of open to listening.
Wow. So that leads us to then what you decided to do. So you watched a documentary about hunger. I'm a dietitian nutritionist, and so your nonprofit makes me so excited, Groceryships. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is and how you decided to start it?
Yeah, so I decided to start it after watching a series of documentaries. I think the most important one was seeing a place at the table, which was about hunger in America. And in America, hunger looks different than it does in Ethiopia. You can miss one meal and then eat KFC the next, and so you have this sort of crazy confluence between hunger and obesity. And one of the reasons that I identified so strongly with that problem was that I had been a heavy kid, and my family was super obese. And I had been teased and bullied and was deeply ashamed. And so the thought of, like, you know, I had had a relatively okay upbringing, and the thought of sort of having that same challenge, but also being hungry at the same time was sort of too much for me. And so my wife and I started this program that sort of started with a simple premise where we buy incredibly healthy fruits and vegetables and groceries for families for a period of 6 months. But then we sort of surround them with a program of education and support that says, okay, there are some like practical skills that one needs to be healthy in America, like, you know, how to read a label and nutrition education and cooking skills. But for me, the sort of key point to it all is that it's not just education. It really is, you know, for me, my sort of eating is tied into my emotional state, feelings of shame, feelings of self-worth, all this sort of like stuff that this woman taught me, my counselor taught me. And so we provide these families not only education, but also a tremendous amount of emotional support to help facilitate personal transformation.
Can I ask you really quickly, Sam, in closing, because there's no arguing what you've done is inspiring, it's commendable, but you also had a nest egg of millions of dollars to just up and leave your job and make this happen. So for the average person who wants to fulfill their dream but don't necessarily have the money to do it, how can they get started? What can we do?
Yeah, I mean, I do think, first of all, that's true. And like I said, like I got incredible, it's a lucky position that I've gotten to sort of see this life lesson. I think that my story is more sort of illustrative of the sort of perils of the fantasy. So, you know, so many people are like, well, one day I'll get rich and then I can do what I want.
Right.
While there is some truth to that, there's also so many people on Wall Street that have so much more money than I do and have been in their careers for 20 years, and they're still saying the same thing. So the thing that I learned really was that this fantasy that I was working toward came from a place of inner lack of self-worth. And so what I did to change that was really working with this counselor to sort of, you know, excavate the pain that I was dealing with, face my anger and pain at the way I was treated as a kid, and all those things. And as I started to sort of spiritually fill up, then, you know, I began to see the world differently.
The rest will follow, right? Once your spirit is full. How are you feeling now?
I'm so much happier, but it's like people ask me that, you know, are you happier? And it's not like, you know, nonprofit work makes me happy and Wall Street makes me unhappy. It's more that I feel like a human again. Like I feel like I'm sort of engaged in the sort of purpose that, you know, my life was gifted to me in order to do, rather than, you know, this sort of like fear-based accumulation of money, which got me a lot of stuff, but in the end was totally miserable and, you know, dehumanizing.
Well, Sam, I think that's an example a lot of people can follow and something we would all strive for. So thank you so much for taking time out to speak with us. And you guys at home, if you want more information about his program, head to groceryships.com and you can get more information on that. So amazing.
Well, and I mean, I just want to commend his therapist.
Right?
Can I just say,
Yeah, really.
Therapy works.
she changed his life, and we talk about that obviously.
Yeah.
Jada's therapist, but we
Right.
talk about it all the time. That when you feel that dissatisfaction,
Yeah.
you sometimes need that third
And
party
I
to
just
help
want
you
to say
view it a
this
different
really
way.
quickly because he connected to meaningful life. And that's what positive psychology is all about in finding your happiness. And I know I talked to you about that earlier in the show.
Yeah. It's
But
amazing stuff, guys.